shop here, and I'm going to try to do some work on a NOBLER today. Figure as long as I got Kenny's camera here, I'll try to do some video of it. Maybe show some little construction techniques. Basically going to start by by trying to duplicate these trailing edge pieces that have a radius. We're going to more or less modernize it and make the one in the back have a 45-degree angle. Use regular nylon hinges instead of cloth hinges, kind of update it a little bit. We're basically going to make this an equal panel NOBLER, a la Jim Greenaway technique. Usually an equal panel plane will carry a little more tip weight, fly a little bit better in the wind. We hope. We don't know for sure yet on a NOBLER how that's going to work out, but I'll get some knives. Now I'm basically going to try to make these. I made a Mylar template from the plans. I didn't want to cut the plans. The idea of making this kit is I don't want to destroy the kit. So I traced over the plans with a thin sheet of Mylar, labeled what they were, and I basically traced that onto a piece of good 1/4-inch wood twice, reversed it, tried to salvage as much of the wood as possible. The first step in making these elevators is going to be I'm going to take this over to the jigsaw and hack this out nice and even. Make sure that they're both completely identical. Now one of the nice tricks to making flaps or elevators that I've found is always have the grain, the trailing edge running parallel here and the hinge line crooked. Don't ever try to make the hinge line parallel to the edge of the grain. You keep a lot of warps out of the system that way, especially if you're making built-up structure like this. So if anybody can see this, I've kept the trailing edge equal parallel to the grain. That's kind of important. You don't want to have this where this would be the wrong way to do it, where you have the hinge line parallel and then the grain is going down this on a crazy angle. Especially if it's A or B grain wood, it's never going to stay straight on you. So I took what I thought was a pretty good piece of C grain wood. It's about 5 pounds stock, and I got the grain parallel to the trailing edge. I traced them out, then I'll put one on top of the other and try to make sure they're exactly equal before I start gluing up these elevators. And by doing that, I at least get a head start on trying to keep this warp free. So I'll go over to the jigsaw and cut this out now, and then we'll come back and take a look at it. You know, I just basically sawed these out of a good old piece of 1/4-inch. They're kind of fuzzy on the edge. First step in any of this, any making of elevators or flaps, is to get them exactly equal. Start right off by having them dead equal. These aren't too bad. Another thing you always want to check, at least one of my preliminary things, is make sure you have that angle at 90 degrees so that you don't have an elevator that one is cocked off to one side. We're going to be putting a horn right in the edge of the elevator instead of the way the plans show it. That makes for a shorter elevator, less twisting and tweaking and flexing. Found that to be a real help. It also lightens up the horn for anybody that's interested in super light weights. I guess the next step is I'm going to have to cut out a bunch of rib blanks and glue this up and start putting an airfoil shape in it. So let me go cut some ribs out and we'll move on to the next step on this. Well, I guess the easiest part here would be I'll make up, now I did the same thing for the stab. The stab gets cut out of 3/8, so let me hack out a piece of 3/8. Find a nice straight 1/4 grain piece, about 4 or 5 pounds stock, and make myself up a leading edge out of 3/8. That'll be the next step in this, and we can basically move on with the construction of the stab. Now, for anybody that isn't familiar with building from plans, or maybe you only built kits in your life, a good way is to take a tracing off the plans on a piece of Mylar. Mylar is drafting paper. You can trace real easy on it, just like making a tracing like when you're a kid in school. Make an accurate tracing with a pencil outline, and it's always hard holding it to the wood. Now, I like to use thumbtacks. I thumbtack the Mylar right to a good piece of wood. This is a good piece of 1/4 grain 3/8. Now I can basically go over this with a pen, get a real nice outline on there, run over to the jigsaw and hack it out. Then take that actual piece of wood and put it right on the plans and make sure it's a mirror image. If it isn't, true it up. We'll make a new one if it's screwed up. Basically, once you take a kit and make up enough of these templates for fuse sides, formers, outlines of stabs and flaps and elevators, and you have a collection of templates like I have in a wall, you can go build that kit anytime you want right off of the plywood templates. There's no reason to ever buy another kit. Or if you build a plane of your own design, once you have it in plywood, you've got it forever. And making modifications to it, you can mark them right on the plywood. Made the tail a little longer, the nose a little shorter. I keep track of all little modifications right on the plywood templates. So it becomes a notebook of sorts too. Now I'll take this over to the jigsaw, saw this out, and then I'll pretty much have to line it up here and hot stuff it, and I'll try to get that on the video too. We'll be framing out this tail. I imagine a tail like this is going to run me a whole day to do it the way I want to do it. But when I'm done, I'll have a real light tail. I'll probably have a tail under 1.5 ounces, and it'll have a real nice airfoil shape in it. The airfoil shape is what gives it the strength. It'll be nice and stiff, and hopefully real nice and true, and I can measure that right off my glass table with a machinist ruler. So let me get busy cutting this out and cutting some ribs out and hot stuffing this up, and we'll try to catch it with the video about every hour. Getting them all trued up, ready to put some ribs in here. I'll glue up the outline of the frame. What I like to do is get this all trued up as much as possible, and of course get a center line on everything. It's important to get a center line anywhere you can on this stuff, and you can always lay it on the glass table and measure up with a machinist rule. And get an idea if you're building, nice and dusty here, building something nice and straight, or if it's getting a warp in it early on in the program. This looks like it's going to be a real nice piece of wood. A lot of times when you cut a piece of wood like this, it springs. It goes into a bow shape. Quarter grain wood does that less than A or B grain. And you're always a lot better off if you can use C grain wood for flaps, elevators, anything that's going to be thin and be in a lot of stress. Fuse sides are another good example. You can't wrap leading edge sheeting with it or anything like that reliably. But you can see this is relatively nice. Now what I'm going to do, before I even glue this together, is try to get a center line on it. Now, there's a lot of different ways of doing this. I'm not sure how I want to do this yet. Maybe I'll glue this up before I put the center line on. Anyway, what I'll do is pick the best piece of the two that I cut. This one's a little cut. This one is dead straight. Okay. Now I'm going to want to put a center line on that piece of wood. One of the easy ways to do that is get some 1/4 inch tape out of a tape supply up here. Okay, we're dealing with 1/2 inch wood, so we're going to need 3/8 tape. We're going to need 1/4 inch tape. I'll try to pick the side of this that's the straightest. All of these look pretty straight. This looks like a pretty good piece of wood. The grain is nice. Okay, and I want to get a center line right down the middle of this whole piece. So what I'll try to do is, I'll pick the best side, and I guess that's the best side right there. Run a piece of 1/4 inch tape right down the whole thing. Now usually, 1/2 inch will not be exactly 1/4 inch. This is not going to be exactly. Okay, so this is a little bit of an undersized piece of wood. Then we go to the next size smaller tape. Now the idea of this is we want to get the, let's see just how thin this white tape is. Same size. We want to get, okay, we'll go to 1/8 inch tape. We want to get that center line right in the middle. We want to get it as accurate as possible. Especially on things like this where they're going to have to be pretty accurate if you want the plane to fly good and groove good. Another way is you can take a machinist ruler and just scribe a center line right down the middle or whatever you think the middle is. And that'll usually be pretty good, but this way I like. This way is pretty accurate. Now what I did, I laid two pieces of tape in equal distance, so now I have just enough room in the middle to get my center line, and I'll take a perfectly straight ruler. This is a pretty good quality aluminum ruler. I'll mark this as close as I can. Okay, and I'll get a nice center line right down the middle of this. This is usually a lot easier if you have somebody helping you do it. Being I'm working alone here. Got no job interview to go to today, so we're in good shape. Okay, I've got nice center line. Now that center line will line up the hinges first of all. Anybody can see that center line, it's pretty straight. This is going to be the stab center line. We can get rid of the tape. If it doesn't look straight, or if it looks a little crooked, we can just take and make a new piece right now before we get any deeper into the construction of this NOBLER. That center line is real important. We're going to build the whole plane off of that center line. And hopefully this is going to be I'll carry that center line onto the back. I really don't have to, but I'll do it anyway, just to make sure I have both sides covered. This one I can do by eye. I just want to make sure I'm really close here. Okay. Having a center line on any kind of built-up structure is real important, because then you can sand the airfoil top and bottom, keep looking back down, and kind of measure it with a little machinist ruler. Anybody doesn't know what a machinist ruler is, I don't know why I keep saying this. Machinist ruler is a real accurate, very small, you can usually buy it in machine shop supply houses for about $3, and it's measured in very fine increments, so you can do this kind of measuring. Let me see if I can show a machinist ruler. It's not a big ruler in inches. This is a machinist ruler. Real small, it's real accurate. And you get used to measuring up your center lines. One side of this is in millimeters. I can see that this is exactly right in the middle. That's real good. Okay, that's real good. We've got this one real accurate for a change. That's a real asset to start off with a nice straight piece of wood with a center line down the middle. Okay, that basically is going to take care of that for a good start. Now I have to do the same thing with this piece. Now I can't reliably do this with a ruler, so I've taken an old trick out of books from days gone by, and I just hold my finger in such a way that I can get this almost dead center if I'm real careful. Then I just check it with the old machinist ruler, make sure I haven't gone way off in left field. Okay, and I'm basically holding one finger here. If you practice this technique a little bit, you'll get it pretty accurate. Harold Price used to use this on all his assembly work. Okay, and I can pretty much draw that down. And of course with this technique I can go right around corners and stuff. Now see, I've wandered off on this side just a little bit because I'm looking at the camera and I'm not really paying attention, so I'll just kind of redo this. Now this is, when you're going around curves, it's a little bit of a pain, but you can do it. You can do it over and over. And you can always make the line thicker than it has to be if necessary, and sand some of it off. Now I'll leave that line on there right up until I actually put the stab in the body, and that line will line up with the line I'm going to draw on the fuse side. That'll give me pretty reasonable alignment anyway. Hopefully we get one of these real accurate one of these days. Okay, and I can just run around with the machinist rule and see that I've got right on the money, right on the money, right on the money, right on the money. Okay, we've been real lucky with that piece. Okay, I'm gonna kind of duplicate the same thing on the inside of this. I like to have as many center lines on these things as I possibly can for my own benefit. Seems like you never can be too accurate with this stuff. Anytime you think you're going overboard on being accurate, you'll probably just be just a little bit crooked. But this sure beats the heck out of throwing darts in the dark and just building something and putting all that finishing time in. 100 hours or so of finishing and buffing, and then finding out you have a crooked tail. That's a center line on that, a center line on that. I'm going to assemble it onto this, and of course I'm going to marry up. When I assemble it, the center lines will marry up. So I should have me a framework that I can slap some ribs in and start sanding out, undercut the middle ribs and sheet it, and I'll have me this feels like it's going to be a real nice assembly. Just by lining up all these center lines, I'll have a good head start on keeping this accurate. So I think I'll do that now rather than take the time on the video. The front, lined up the center line. You can see we got a center line around a complete thing. I've laid it back down over the plans and marked out where the little ribs are going to be. Okay, now in this case I'm not going to use the kit ribs. I'm going to make my own 1/2-inch pieces of wood, glue them all in, and airfoil it all together with a sanding block. What I have is a piece from a belt sander that's glued to a piece of glass right on the table here, and I'll try to focus in on that later. and I can take this whole piece and just grind in the airfoil shape that I want. Little by little, again, looking down at the center line and seeing how close I'm getting to being accurate. Of course, I want it to taper out at the tip. I want it to be thicker in the middle than it is at the tip. I want it to have a nice smooth contour, and I can usually feel that. Then I'll want to final sand this all in and sheet, undercut the 2 or 3 middle ribs, whatever the plans call for, and sheet the middle. And this should be a real nice, rigid, light stab. Very accurate. Looks like we've, even in gluing this up, we've maintained it completely accurate. It'll be nice and stiff too. Then we're going to start working on the elevators. A nice way to get this curve in here nice is use the Dremel tool with which I just did, with a sanding drum with fine paper, and just get a complete radius in there, make it nice. This you can do on a belt sander, nice, even it all up. And obviously the back is 1/2 inch, this is 3/8, there's going to be a little bit of a taper. So if you did want to build this flat on a building bench, a good way would be to put a couple drops of hot stuff right on the glass, glue this right to the glass, stick some sheeting under here until that center line came real accurate, or IBM cards, whatever, and then just drop your ribs in one by one and hot stuff them down. That'd be a real nice way to do it. I can't do that on this table because I've got the plans on top of the table. It'd be a mess to do it. And actually I can build this up in a year just as easy. So I'm going to cut out, looks like about 40 or 50 ribs here. Glue a few of them in, and then we'll take another look at this in 15 or 20 minutes. I guess it'll take a half hour to put them ribs in, but that'll be the next step. But this is a good starting point no matter how you build a wing, a tail, a stab, or rudder, is to get a center line on everything and work from that center line. If you don't work from that center line, it's like throwing darts in the dark. You'll put all that finishing time into a plane, go out and fly it, and it'll just do crazy things, and you'll never be able to figure out why. Even with all these center lines, there's a chance you can mess it up. But this sure is a cheap insurance program to try, at least have a fighting chance that this airplane is going to fly good after you put all that finishing time and buffing and rubbing and everything. So, and being I kind of want this plane to be my 55 Chevy, my little jewel, I really don't want it to come out to be a bad flyer. I want it to be better than I'm expecting. So I'm going to put the ribs in here, and then we'll get back on the camera. One of the nice things about making up little parts like ribs and the little parts is you can use up all your scrap wood. I save all my scrap wood in the corner of the shop, and I go through the scrap wood, and I found a whole bunch of real nice ends of 1/16 quarter grain that I want to use to make these ribs with. That'll be real nice if I can use 1/16 quarter grain. I've got, oh gee, I've got quite a few of it here. I got 4 or 5 more pieces. I'll be able to make the whole stab and elevator ribs out of quarter grain. Now this A grain and B grain will be fine if nothing else comes along. But again, I'm building off the top of the pile of the wood. This is the lightest wood I have, and it's all quarter grain, all C grain wood. So you think, why throw this stuff away just because you can't get a rib or something on it? I'll save that up. That'll be my little ribs for the tail. And I've saved all the cost of ruining a good sheet of wood, and plus I'm using the lightest wood because again it's all come off the top of the pile. So I'll measure out how many I need and cut them all out of that nice C grain wood. Again, I'll save this. I may need this later on. But for sure, it's a good idea to have a nice big box and save all your little scraps, and when you can use them up, use them up. Even if you're rich, even if you got a lot of money. Okay, now I'm cutting out ribs right now. Another nice little thing, if ever you're going to cut out ribs, you're going to cut anything out, don't put an X-Acto knife behind your ear, which I just did, is have a real nice soft block of wood. This is a soft old block of balsa wood. And if you cut on that with a razor blade, you don't wear out your glass table or your good table or whatever. And you can see I'm just taking I made a template of the one rib, the center rib, the longest one. Take that template, I need 24 ribs. I marked it, so I'll have it for future reference if I want to duplicate this again. Maybe a day, even 20 years from now, when you won't even remember what a NOBLER is, let alone be able to buy a kit or build one. And I'm just going right down the line here. I don't know how good you're going to be able to see this on the video. I just moved the camera. Again, keep in mind I'm not a video expert or anything. I'm just trying to do this. Hopefully the idea of this is somebody out there can watch the video, get some ideas on upgrading their building skills, drum up some interest maybe in somebody that hasn't built for a long time, give them the little fire under them burning. And I'm basically using up my scrap 1/16 quarter grain that I save, making little ribs. I'm like a little squirrel. I save everything here. And basically I'm going to get this guy. I need 24 of these. And if you cut over the balsa wood, you'll find out your X-Acto knife will last for a year before you have to buy another one, especially if you're cutting 4 and 6 pound balsa wood. You'll never wear one out. If you cut over a glass table, or if you cut over a wood table, that tip of that knife wears right out. Now, this knife I haven't replaced since I started building this kit, and I suspect it'll last through the whole kit if I take care of it. I don't start cutting over the table again. But this will save you some time. Again, if you had a complex shape to this part, you could just thumbtack it down and just trace around it with the razor blade. Do not use a pen. You will add the thickness of the pen and then deduct from it, or I should say. It'll be less accurate than if you just cut right over the original template. And you can do this. I've done this with a ringmaster. The ringmaster I used to win Old Time Stunt at the 82 Nats, I did this way. I just traced out a kit onto good wood. Probably chopped 7-8 ounces off the plane just in having decent wood, especially with Sterling kits. Sterling kits are like infamous for having hardwood in instead of balsa. So if you're careful and you select wood good, and again, you have to, there's no secret to getting good wood. You just buy a lot of it, weigh it, and take the best for yourself. Sell the rest to your friends. Give it away. Use it in a fireplace. If you don't build planes, the heaviest piece of wood I would like to have in my shop would be about 6 pounds. The lightest piece would probably be about 4. Anything under 4 is really going to be unstable once it gets moist and damp and you dope it. It'll soak up a lot of dope. So if you stick to between 4 and 6 pound wood, you'll probably be pretty safe. You can order that wood any of the places that sell balsa wood, and there's 3 or 4 locally, and of course Sig, and of course Lone Star, and etc. You can specify that grade of wood and you'll probably pay a little extra for it, or a lot extra for it, but you probably won't throw so much away. And it certainly is worth it. It doesn't pay to even try to use up old wood that's much heavier than 6 pounds a square inch. If you do, you wind up with a real heavy airplane that isn't in any way better than a 4 to 6 pound wood airplane. I haven't found it to be anyway. Especially if you get into a foam wing where there's a lot of sheeting, and that sheeting just tends to get heavier and heavier and absorb dope and everything. You could really paint yourself in a corner where the plane will be too heavy before you even paint it. All the foam wings I use, Jim Greenaway makes, and he sheets them with 16th, not the thinner wood that some people use. And then I try to block sand in the shape I want, thinner at the tips and thicker at the root, because there's no spar in those wings. That's proven to be pretty successful. We haven't broken one of those type of wings yet, but that doesn't mean we won't. Let's see if we got 24 here. Looks like we do. 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 13, 16, 18, 20. We need 5 more. Whee, away goes the pen. See, you get on camera and you get nervous. Just knowing you might get an Academy Award for this. I'm hoping other people out there that have access to video cameras, or you certainly can rent one, and make up maybe some little tapes of little tricks that you've discovered over the years. In addition to what's printed in Pro Stunt News, it should be a real help to people on the way learning. I've certainly found out all the newcomers that I work with, they just spend the day with me in the shop here and take notes, and they pick up a lot of little cute information. Little things sometimes you never think of yourself, and I've certainly learned things from everybody I've ever watched build, from Harold Price to Lou Dudka to Jim Greenaway probably being the best one. Little tips and little techniques that if you don't think of them yourself, you can just spend the whole winter building a plane that the wing will fold or the nose will fall off, or something will happen. Or it'll be too heavy or too light or tail heavy or something. You got to put a little thought into that. And if you can get somebody to help you, and I hope this video is going to help some people, if you can get somebody to help you just with some basic techniques, you're going to be miles ahead of a guy that's just groping in the dark trying to figure this out for himself. Now, I've decided to build this tail in midair. I'm going to basically be putting one rib at a time in here. And what I'll do is, just like anybody hasn't built an I-beam airplane, I take a 1/4 inch piece and just hold a piece of, this is 180 sandpaper on it. And I want to kind of get a 90-degree angle on each side. I want to make sure they're true. And I want to start at the center so this will have some strength. And I can line up those little lines that I put on before, like so, kind of center everything out. Now if you really want it to be a fanatic, what you could do is center line all the ribs too. Harold used to do that. And his work really was accurate. It really was impressive. Okay, now I have one rib in there just to show. I don't want to use the thick hot stuff. I want to use thin hot stuff. So let me go get the other hot stuff. And once we get it lined up pretty good, I can kind of just put a little pressure. Oh, yeah, that's nice. That's how you break a rib. Well, shows you that nobody's perfect. We'll match up another one. Okay, once we get the center ones in, this will have some strength and we should be able to... Again, if you get nice tight wood fits, what happens, if you fool around here and get wood fits, you wind up using less glue. The overall weight will drop down and the strength won't drop down. I hope I'm on camera here. Okay, I have no idea if this hot stuff is going to be good. It's jet. If that kicks over, yeah, that kicked right over. Okay, that's good. So we got one rib in here. Now no sense leaving the camera on. I'm going to fill in all the ribs and then we'll pick this up at the point where we... Alright, we're getting some of the ribs put in here now. This is a little, just kind of show the technique here of getting a couple of these ribs trimmed into shape. Much like building an I-beamer, each rib has to be trimmed to shape. Try to get everything at 90 degrees. If you're not accurate at doing this, you wind up with little gaps, and the silk span and the finish will show that, that's for sure. Okay, we got to trim this a little more. When you trim one undersize, just use it for the next rib down the road. And you don't waste any. Now this one I made a little too small for the first bay. I'll use this in the second one. Now I like to make it that it's a nice, almost a press fit, but not that it's squeezing things apart. Nice tight fit. I line it up with the little center line that I have on there, and the up and down line showing where the rib should be. Well, for the plan, that's a nice tight fit. Okay. My daughter must have just woke up. I hear the radio playing. I have to get her to shut that down. Okay, everything's parallel this way, straight up and down, nice. Kind of squeeze it in, it'll sit by itself. Give it a drop of hot stuff. Now I'll go back and make another rib for that one that I made too small. So actually none of these are going to go to waste. If you hit this with a little sandpaper on the corner and leave the dust on there, the dust will kick off the hot stuff and make a nice little filler for you. That all these joints will be nice and tight. Okay, sure don't want to make too many of these undersized. We'll run into ribs. Okay. And we're looking for a nice tight wood fit, something that'll stay without pins or without anything holding it. These will fit kind of tight, and you can kind of... Now if you really want to be a fanatic, if you're really looking to win a Concourse award or something like that, what you can do is make up a little block. And that little block can then go between ribs so that each one is dead spaced even. Now in this case I'm not trying for anything. This will probably just wind up to be and I'm pretty close. That's close enough. Most of the people don't really pay too much attention to that. They basically just want to get the plane built and get the hell out of the workshop. But I fooled with stuff like trying to get it all even and real pretty, real workmanlike. It's paid off too. I think people will recognize the fact that most of the stuff I build at least is relatively nice appearing, even if it isn't the most functional stuff in the world. So I'll get this last rib in here. Now when you get out to the tip, this is where it gets to be. These are going to be sanded quite a bit. You got to really get a nice fit in here. You really don't want to get a sloppy fit down here. This is going to have a little bit of an angle on it too. I looked outside and it looks like it's going to rain all day, so we may be in the shop all day. We may get quite a bit of this video done today. Now on the tip, I can kind of get an angle on this rib, so it'll fit right into that gap. Oh yeah, oh yeah. I wonder if they're ever going to see this in appearance judging. It's amazing when you put your plane in appearance judging how very little they do see. They don't have enough time to really look them over with a fine-tooth comb. So most guys really won't spend the time and effort to get it perfect. But there's other reasons for making it perfect. And one of them is to satisfy yourself and be happy knowing that you're doing quality work. And that when you pass it on to somebody else, either give the plane away or keep it yourself. That's kind of rigid. That's kind of nice. That's a nice little piece. I've got half of that done. I'll finish off the rest of the ribs and then we'll put the camera on block sanding in. Alright, we basically got all the ribs in now, and you can see that obviously they stick up in the front. They're not all perfectly even. We don't have to get them even right now. We do have a center line there. This is a piece of a belt sander that I glued right to my table with contact cement. And what I'm going to try to do is get a real nice airfoil shape in this now. Basically using this technique. If you go side to side, you run a bigger risk of breaking the ribs off. Of course, you still break some this way. Just hot stuff them back if you break them. Takes a little bit of a technique. You got to practice a little bit to get a real nice airfoil in there. First step is to get all the ribs sanded down even with the leading edge. Now the leading edge is 3/8, the trailing edge is 1/2 inch, so there's going to be some sanding required here to even this up. We'd also like it to be thinner at the tip than at the root, so we'll kind of have to work that into the program too. Now if you go slow and take your time, keep checking your center lines, you're going to find out this is not that bad. Now obviously you could buy foam stabs and sheet them and whatnot and whatnot. But this is also the old-fashioned way of doing it, and there's a lot to be said for building this way. The ribs look nice, first of all. It tends to come out light if you use good wood. You have complete control of it yourself. You don't have to farm any of it out to somebody that cuts foam. Certainly a lot cheaper than doing anything with foam. Of course, if you have a lot of money, well, that's cool too. But this is the old-fashioned way of building. This is the way planes were built in the 50s and 60s. Still a pretty reliable way of doing it. Good old balsa wood and glue. Now you can see we've got that kind of blended in pretty nice. I don't have the tip blended in yet. Okay, I'm going to work that in, then I'll go out in the yard because I don't like to put too much dust in this shop, and I'll carve the rest of that in, then come in and finish sand it in here. Now this is a good technique to use when you make built-up flaps. You could probably build a Magnum this way. The flaps and elevators, I think, are built up on a Magnum. Certainly good for anybody building an old-time stunt plane. It's a real accurate way of building it, and you can really duplicate things real nice. Get a nice airfoil shape in here. Of course, then we're going to have to undercut the middle ribs and sheet the middle with 16 so that it mounts into the body nice and solid. This is just your traditional way of building. A little more time consuming, a little less expensive, possibly a little stronger, depending. Certainly a lot more nostalgic. If nostalgia means anything to you, then there's almost no choice in what you're going to do. Of course, breathing in this sawdust. It's a good idea to wear a mask, which of course I don't. I'll be breathing too much of this in. Once you get the ribs pretty even in shape, you can almost feel safe in changing your sanding pattern. It's really annoying when you break a rib doing this, or several ribs. This will get you a nice true surface though. You'll wind up with something really impressive when you're done. Okay, we're sneaking up on it now. Sneaking up on having that 3/8 leading edge blend right into the 1/2 inch back. We don't want to take any material off the trailing edge right now. We just want to get a complete blending in here. That's what we're looking for. Try to taper it out so it's a little thinner at the tip, and I'll know when I hit 3/8 because I won't feel the step in the tips then. Yeah, so far that's coming out nice. That'll be real good. We still have a nice center line on that. Okay. Once we get some of them ribs ground out, we can kind of start working on a tip. Again, as soon as we see the step disappear, we know we're down to 3/8, and then we have to go from there. Okay, that disappeared. Now we can kind of work on the other tip. That's a little bit more to go. And don't be mad if you break a couple ribs doing this. That's par for the course. You just hot stuff them right. You drop the thing right on the floor here. Okay, that blended in nice. Now you can't feel any ridge. Okay, now we'll work on this tip. You can get a sanding belt and Sears Roebuck for about $5. It'll last forever. It never wears out. It's a real high grit, high quality paper. You can get various grits for carving and sanding and knocking things down. I think this is about 100 grit. It'll last forever. You'll never wear it out. And it's hard to duplicate the accuracy you can get using this traditional method, the method that probably was developed in the 50s. Virtually everybody back then built things up. There was no foam. Took a little more time, a little more skill. Couldn't pay somebody to build one for you for all the money in the world, unless you had a father. Okay, we're kind of sneaking up on that right now. Now we've got a nice outline. It drops to 3/8. I think we'll do a little carving on this now. Years, still a real nicely finished Nobler. Probably still fly real good too. Alright, I'm going to finish carving this and then we'll go back to the block and sand it out. Alright, I went and took a little coffee break. I now have the stab all evened out, trued out. I've got some of my taper in the back here. Did that with a sanding block outside. I got all the ribs in. Everything is nice and true. Super nice and light. Super nice piece of quarter grain wood here. Now what I'm going to do is go back to the block, no point rephotographing that in, and just re-true all these surfaces up, get everything nice and true, finish this off with probably 320 grit paper, And I'll pretty much be ready then to make the elevators and hinge it back on. I'll also have to undercut this and sheet the middle, I think 3 or 4 ribs. I have to look at the plans. So we keep this exactly like an old Nobler. Alright, so that'll be the next thing. It basically took me about an hour and a half to make this piece. Probably take me another hour to sand it in. I've got the right contours and tapers here, so it's nice and light. I'm getting enthusiastic about this. I'll finish off my cup of coffee. Even I deserve a drink of coffee after this. And by the time I finish this piece off, we'll be ready to start working on the elevators. It'll probably be lunchtime. Looks like it's clearing up outside. Maybe we'll even get to do some flying this afternoon. I got some stuff I want to try on the big plane. Alright, so I'm going to finish my coffee and then we'll get back to doing this video. Another half an hour or so, we'll be ready to start the elevators. Okay, we're finished. Finished with all the sanding on this. I'm basically going to undercut these 4 center ribs as per the plans. Sheet it with 1/16. Put a nice little radius in the corners. And this is kind of, you can do this by eye, or you could probably measure it some accurate way. I just slice off about a 1/16 off the top of the 4 center ribs to allow for my sheeting. And I can get that reasonably accurate here. I'm going to use up again some of my scrap 1/4 grain 1/16 that's of a good lightweight quality. Try to use that 1/4 grain wherever I possibly can. It really does add a lot of strength without adding weight. And try to be kind of accurate as getting the sheeting on here. I don't want to have to sand too much of this down. Now I want to try to make a nice radius in the corners. Radius in the corners helps a whole lot on the silk spanning. We're not going to silk span yet, but I'll try to give you an idea of what I'm shooting for. I'm trying to get that there's no sharp edges that'll show up through the silk span. Now the corners are where the sheeting edge, where the sheeting ends, and the corners in here are all very important to get that nice and smooth, a nice radius on end. And obviously there's a lot of time. You have to radius each corner, each corner, each corner. So any radiuses you can get in early in the program will just save you that much more work later on. And so that's why basically what I'm going to try to do now is get some nice edges on the sheeting. Let's see how I can make up a little template for this. Okay, I can kind of lock that in there. I kind of do this with a pen first. Get a basic outline of how many ribs I want to do. I want to do from there to there, and from there to there. Now you got to remember when you're using a pen, leave the pen line on the wood. Okay, I have a pretty good outline of the piece I want now. Now the only problem is, get me my machinist ruler here, is I don't want these sharp corners. I want radiuses in there. So again, I'll get out a triangle. I'll make this piece a little bit oversized. Hopefully oversized enough that I can just sand contour it in real nice and easy. Before I glue the first one on, I'll make the second one. I'll make that even a little more oversized, so there's no way I can get hurt on that. Now I'll just add that radius into the sheeting. Again, those radiuses on the sheeting are a big help when you try to sand this stuff in. If you get a point, for sure the silk span's going to have a stress point there. It's going to rip. Later on down the road, you got a problem. If you work out these problems ahead of time, you come out way ahead of the game. Again, it's a good idea to make all of this stuff oversized and then just block sand it in as close and as accurate as you possibly can. I like to cut on a soft block of balsa wood. That block of balsa wood will last 2 or 3 airplanes, so there's no point replacing it. You just keep cutting away. It'll save your X-Acto blades, it'll save you time. Now the rest of this I'm going to have to do. Now probably the grain is going to want to split when I get around those circles, so what I do is I make them oversized and then I just hit them with the Dremel tool when I get down around there. Now the drum on the Dremel is exactly the right radius for what I'd like, and then of course they'll all be even too. And again, when the plane has some wear and tear on it, you'll notice that silk span will not tend to crack, or when you buff, you won't tend to buff out those corners. The less sharp edges you have, the better it's going to be. Try to get a nice neat cut on this, even though we don't need it. It just makes gluing it a lot more fun. Now before I put this away, before I try to glue this on, I'll duplicate it. So I'm not going to fit on that piece of sheet. I got plenty of old quarter grain wood here too, so it's coming in real handy. This was super nice light wood I got. Okay, I'll duplicate the extra piece. I know the bottom will be pretty much the same. This doesn't have to be accurate because you're going to sand this, once it's finally installed, you're going to do sanding these corners and edges right in with a block. And you should be all set. Alright, now I'm going to basically take this piece, and it's a little bit oversized right now, so I can pretty much see how much I have to take off. I'll sure want to get a nice edge down here. That edge will show up through the paint. If you don't get nice tight glue fits on the wood, you can fill it in with DAP and all the different kind of filler materials, but if you don't get a nice tight fit, somewhere when that airplane is out in the sun, or somewhere when that airplane gets a little old, you're going to wind up with some funny little lumps in the paint, because the wood expands and contracts at a different rate than the DAP or any of the fillers, even sanding sealer, and you wind up with crazy kind of little ripples in it. If you want that really perfect look, you've got to do it with wood fits, and it's got to be accurate. And there's just no free lunch here. This is just a time-consuming thing. Everything has to get right on the money. That looks like it's pretty decent. Again, those little radiuses there are super important. Now, one of the tricks we can try, and let's see if we remember this from the good old days, is to get in there with the razor blade and get a cut right on the inside. That'll save us a lot of block sanding if we can do it. Again, the trick here is to get a nice tight wood fit without a lot of glue gopping up through it, without having to use any DAP or anything. Take the little machinist ruler and even those edges out as best you can, and I think that'll be relatively accurate. I don't think there'll be any problem with that at all. If it isn't, you don't want to fill that hole up with DAP or glue. You want to take a little sliver of balsa wood and shove it on down there, and then from the inside hot stuff it. Now before I even true this off, let's just see if it's accurate, if it's worth using this part or not. I don't know if you can see how accurate that is. It looks like it's going to be pretty decent. We'll sand the rest of that back in there. Okay. Again, this is just a ballpark deal. This don't have to be really super good. I'll tack this on with some hot stuff. It's important to tack the corners too, because this is where you're going to be sanding with your block later. Of course, it's nice when you glue your hand to the part too. That always helps. I'll just kick that off a little bit. Don't want to waste too much video on doing this. Now the other part I'll have to put in from the top, obviously. I'll have no choice about that, simply because I won't be able to get in here. So while I can get in here, it would make sense to get a little bit of glue on the ribs. That'll stiffen this up a little bit at a very little cost and weight. I can get some of that fresh down in there, and hopefully maintain that contour nice. And get down in here. Now I try to do is press that down even, so that when I sand it off, I'm not going to wind up with one piece paper thin and one piece thick. I really don't have this as accurate as I like it. I'd like it to be more of it. Now just as an example, I've watched Ski Dombrowski do work like this, and he would throw that piece away. He wouldn't use it. But I basically use it, and I'll block sand it in and try to make the most of it. even though it's not as dead accurate as I'd like. You can just press that down while the hot stuff is kicking off. The little bit of sawdust that gets in there helps kick it off too. And that's one piece. Now I'm going to cut the other piece out and do that. I'll take my old sanding block, just try to true that up ever so little. And you don't really want to thin the wood out too much. You just want to get a minimum of sanding on that so it's nice and accurate. Then what I'll do finally is take some 320 or 400 and a block and block this all final down so that every rib ends with every piece of sheeting. It should be real accurate when I'm done with it. Right now this is about as accurate as it has to be. This didn't come out half bad. Now what happens now is you're filling up that gap in there with sawdust. Okay? Once that gap is filled with sawdust, you can run a little bead of hot stuff over it. That little gap is now getting filled with sawdust. Again, you'll probably break some ribs doing this before you get it perfect. You get used to hearing that sound of running a sandpaper across the ribs. That's pretty decent. And I've kind of got that to disappear. Good old hot stuff clogging up already. Run a bead of hot stuff over that seam. It'll just turn all that sawdust into some kind of filler wood. You run it right over with all the hot stuff even kicks and it'll make like a little paste go down into that gap. Now when I do the final sanding on this with the 400, I'll be real careful to get that gap just perfect. Always watch, I'm building up a little ball of hot stuff on here, putting some gap. Side sheeted, all the rounded edges done with the Dremel drum. Nice rounded contours, matches that. Made up a sanding block, just thumbtack a nice piece of sandpaper, try to get it relatively tight. Onto a piece of balsa wood. And this will be our final rough shaping before we go into final sanding. This will just hit any rough edges that are still up there, including the sheeting. Any place at all that this is just not going to follow a nice airflow. You can kind of go over that nice and easy. This is real good to do on an I-beamer too. Any rib surface, top blocks. Bigger the sandpaper block, the longer you can make it, the better it is. It'll pick up the high spots a lot quicker. It'll really add a little professional touch. You can't do any sanding without a block and really be accurate. That'll kind of finish that off. I've got all the sheeting. Oh boy, that feels nice. Okay, that feels nice too. Kind of got this real nice now. Make sure I have a good hot stuff joint on there. Yeah, I sure do. Okay, that's going to be fine. The rest will fill in with filler. Now sight down all the dimensions. Make sure I'm not thicker on one side than I am on the other. Always put a little radius on any of your sharp edges. That'll keep you from buffing through when you go to do the final buffing. You want a nice little radius edge. You want nothing razor sharp. Now the next step in this program would be, once I finish the elevators, is going to be to join it all together and then follow those airfoil contours. Smooth that all out. You don't want to have one sticking up higher than the other, lower than the other. Any of the possible problems you could have from doing that. So, but it's about lunchtime now, and I've got some other work to do on the other airplane. And I think I'll just take a break from this. I'm getting all choked up with this sanding dust. I'm going to work on the other plane for an hour or so. I'm going to do some work on a muffler. I'm going to get that finished. Then I'll come back and try to work on elevators this afternoon. This was a morning's work. Making this stab was a morning's work. You can get a rough idea. For me, I'll look at my watch right now. It's 11:45. I started on this at 7. About 5 hours of work to make this stab. But it looks like we got a good one. And you never can do this by hand. It all has to be done with a block if you want it to be real accurate. If you want that finish not to buff through on corners and edges. That's one of the nicest tails I've ever made anyway. Not too ashamed of that. Still got a little rough spot here. So we'll sure. Now what has to be done with this is I have to, all these edges have to be taken care of. Then I'll give this whole surface 2 coats of light coat, silk span it, go back and hit all those edges, round off the top of the ribs, and I'll bring this up into about silver before I actually mount it in the airplane. Silver finish. I like to finish individual parts. Certainly not necessary to do that, but that's the way, if you want it to be perfect, that's the way it's got to be. And that's just about it on a NOBLER stab. Now that's a 5-hour operation. We've got ourselves something that otherwise would be unobtainable anyway, other than get somebody to make it for you. I doubt if you're going to find anybody, even me, that'll make these for you. You see one side's just a tad thinner than the other. I'll kind of work that out. You gotta develop most of the feel with your fingers. Your fingers do most of the feeling. You don't do this with your eye. It's got to be done with your fingers. You can just feel when one side's thicker than the other. You can look down the center line and see, look in that center line up in the front there and see we're pretty darn accurate on this. This was really a good one. And that's pretty much traditional technology that was used in the 50s, the 40s, who knows when. Pretty universal in model building. If you stick to using a block and you really take your time, use your fingers a lot to find the high spot, you're going to come up with some real outstanding workmanship. And I'm sure you'll have no trouble duplicating what I just did. So, like I said, I'm going to go have my lunch. And I'm going to work on the muffler on the other airplane for a while. Be no point in videoing that, since that'll be an experiment and we don't even know if it's going to work yet. And we'll be back here probably later tonight. This afternoon I'll work on the elevators. So until then, enjoy. I got to open up the Pampa mail. I noticed there's about 15 pieces of mail in the mailbox. We'll see what's going on with Pampa today. Alright, lunch was very delicious. What I decided to do rather than make the elevators is I want to carve up the block that I'm going to use to mold the NOBLER canopy. Now Bob Gildini offered to mold me a canopy. I love the canopies on his Olympic and things, and since I'm not good at molding, I'm going to kind of mail this form out to Bob and ask him to please mold me a canopy for this NOBLER. Now I'm hoping I'm going to be able to use that same canopy form on some of my other ships, since all my ships tend to look like NOBLERs anyway. Old traditional stunt ships here. I'm going to try to carve up a block and probably get it out to Bob in the mail tonight if I can, and hope that he can get me back a canopy, because I'll be ready for a canopy in a few days. I've traced out the former for the turtle deck. Of course you have to make it undersized. He's going to use 40 thousandths plastic. So I'm going to make this 40 thousandths undersize so it can be sanded right into the turtle deck, molded right in, so to speak. And if anybody remembers Silhavy's Nobler and various other, the kind of tinny thing that comes in the kit, I don't really like the thing that comes in the kit myself. But if Bob will mold me up a few of these canopies, well hell, I'll be set for the whole year. Basically just going to rough out this block, get it almost the shape of the turtle deck, put the contours in it with some rough sandpaper, and put kind of a little sealer finish on it before I mail it out to him. I think this will work out just fine. Since it'll still be a little flexible, it need not be ultra accurate, but certainly would be nice to have it as accurate as possible. Again, carving, a lot of people have trouble carving. It seems like I don't have much trouble carving. I like to carve. But a good way is to always get the general outline of what you want to do locked in before you go on to final sanding. Now I'm making this canopy block up actually before I made the fuselage. The right way to do it would be to make the fuselage. But since there'll be some turnaround time on this canopy, I probably won't get it back a couple of weeks. I can't expect the man to do volunteer work for me and do it on time. I'm going to just make the most of what I possibly can here. Now I'd like to get this centered somehow. Again, this is the way you make a canopy block or a cowling, a wingtip, is you try to get a center line somewhere around there, and you know that's about where it's going to be. Kind of get rid of as much of the extra material as you can. Try to keep nice radiuses on everything. I'm trying to do this canopy block from memory, except the memory's 20 years old, so. But if you know you're going to get rid of some of the extra material, well, you may as well get rid of it right away. Now, somebody borrowed my razor plane. I think Ken Thompson has the razor plane because I don't have it here. You could use a razor plane to do some of this work. And I sure would like to have it back. If you got it, Ken, how about it? Whoever's got it. We don't know who's got it. A lot of people beg and borrow things out of this shop. But that's half the fun of being involved in stunt, is running over and borrowing somebody's can of silver paint, or running out of hot stuff on a Sunday morning and missing half of the Giant game because you got to run up to New York State to get some hot stuff so you can keep your project going. Well, let's see how accurate we have that. That's really not super accurate. I'll do some of the sanding outside because I don't want to. I'm getting my shop and this video camera all dusty, and I really don't want to do that. Try to do some of this outside. But anyway, we're getting a nice. Just give you a rough idea of what's going to be involved in this canopy block. Now, like I said, I'll get this out to Gildini today and see if he can mold this up for me. Looks like it'd be a rather reasonable thing to mold, no big deal. Of course, we'll find out one way or the other. Again, if you kind of use a center line, I guess a center line here would be appropriate. You can almost do it by eye. You would think that center line would be of some value. It's of a lot of value when we get down to doing wingtips. This plane is going to have solid block wingtips for appearance sake. I like the way solid wingtips look. I don't like built-up wingtips. So we'll center line this up and then go out in the driveway and try to keep some of the sanding dust off of this video camera. Now we got a center line, we can look from all these angles and see which way we're missing the boat here. It looks like we're missing the boat here quite a bit. Again, you could use an electric drill for doing some of this. An electric drill comes in handy. Any number of sanding blocks would come in handy. Starting maybe with 180 and working your way down to 320. For a canopy block, you want to get a nice finish on it, that's for sure. You want to have a decent finish. You don't want to send something out to somebody that looks like it was carved out with a chainsaw. The guy won't really be too enthusiastic about working on your equipment. Okay. Well, it looks like it might be time to go do some sanding here. But I've tried to make this a little bit oversized, a little bit bigger than it has to be in all dimensions, so that Bob can basically have some material to work with when he runs his oven, get that plastic heated up. Alright, I'm going to go sand this out, and then we'll give you a little show of this before I put it in the envelope. Here's our canopy block, sanding it down, final sanding it with 400. Spent about 10 minutes out in the backyard getting the rough shape. I'm going to mail this out to Bob today. Hope they'll get a canopy back to me before I'm ready to actually use it. Got me a little old-fashioned pilot to put in this guy. Make up a nice little canopy for it. Even though you don't get any points for that, it certainly is nostalgic. It's certainly part of the stunt world that I've come to love, is having a nice little canopy if you can. Certainly people around it do appreciate it. And you want to get a nice finish. Now I don't know what kind of finish actually you should put on here before you put this in the oven. I don't know if lacquer will melt. I won't put any finish on it. I'll let Bob put the finish on it and decide what the final finish should be on that. That looks about like what I'm looking for. Oh, this sawdust will kill you. I hate sanding indoors. I like to do my sanding outside. This could really ruin your whole day. But we'll get a nice little contour in there. Nice radius. Everything has to have a nice radius. When you feel this, I don't want to feel where this canopy ends and where the turtle deck begins. I want that to blend right in. So this is basically a 40 thousandths under canopy mold. It's oversized, so he'll have some room to stretch the plastic. I know Ski Dombrowski makes canopies, and he actually sands them into the plane, so that when you see that canopy where it ends, where the canopy ends and the turtle deck begins, there's no way you can even feel it. If you close your eyes, it just gets an imaginary one contour, and that's really the super top level builders do that. This might be a nice canopy to have an extra one of. I'll ask Bob to make 3 of them, one for my Pro Stunt plane, one for the NOBLER, and a spare, in case I get to build 2 planes over the winter. I doubt it. We'll use job interviews and everything. But we'll give it a try. You want to have a real nice contour on that. I want to have this canopy be the highlight, the focal point of the airplane. There's just no way this is going to be that way if I don't put some time into getting a real nice canopy. That canopy that comes with the kit you could forget about. That thing will fall off 3 flights into the season. Oil will get inside, and that'll be the end of it. Another thing too, for anybody who doesn't know, you should always leave a pinhole somewhere in the canopy into the airplane itself, so that you don't get moisture buildup inside the canopy from taking it from a damp cellar to out in the sun. You can have a real problem with that somewhere down the road. You want to try to avoid that if you can. Well, that's about the contour. Radius these edges off so Bob thinks I'm a pro. Alright, so I'll go put this in the mail to him, and by that time I'll see what other projects we could work on today. It's going to be a write-off this day, no flying today. Now, I mentioned before I had some maintenance to do on these airplanes. Edison being over now, the next contest on our local contest circuit is going to be the circle burner contest in 2 weeks. So basically what I want to do, I want to take and let's back up a little bit. Let's go and say when you fly at the circle burner field, you usually want the high horsepower setup, the muffler that will make the most power, and that's this one right here, which usually is on the backup airplane. So I'm going to take the one that's on the good airplane and put on the high horsepower muffler and replace the motor with the one that right now is making the most power, which happens to be in this airplane. I'm going to do all that maintenance this afternoon, kind of give me a break from the sawdust they're working on at NOBLER. I really should make a change on a landing gear too, but I can't take a chance right now. I'll fly the plane first because this muffler change is going to change the CG a little bit. And before I know for sure that I want to move that CG forward, I don't want to alter two things at once. I'll change the muffler and motor now, go back and plot the CG, balance it out. I'll only take one plane to the circle burner contest. It'll be late in the season, nobody will be out for blood, that's for sure. So, and I'll go out and try this afternoon. Another thing I want to do, I want to basically try, and I haven't tried it yet, I'm going to alter the control ratio on the Pattern Master. I'm going to make it, as per one of Big Jim's suggestions, I'm going to make it a change that the flaps will be moving about 10 degrees more. I've plotted out the new horn dimensions. Now I have a replaceable block in that airplane that I can alter the control ratio from 1 to 1 and 9 to 10 and 3 to 4 and whatever, and alter the free play and the slop, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to make that change this afternoon too. Again, it's a rainy day out there. I've worked 6 hours already in the morning sanding balsa wood, and I need a change. I want to get some castor oil on my hands right now, get dirty, get down and boogie with these motors. So I'm going to do this now. Put the high horsepower setup in the Pattern Master, and possibly tomorrow morning, 6 in the morning when Sue goes to work, run out and get a couple flights and see how it's working. And that'll basically be all I do to set up for the circle burner contest. There ain't a whole lot else you can do. You have to fly very fast there to get through the turbulent air. It's a terrible field. It's real lumpy and bumpy. A lot of planes flip over and break rudders and things. But I'd prefer to fly the Pattern Master instead of the BJ. Right now the Pattern Master is working the best of all the planes I have. And well, right now it's just like a racing motorcycle or racing car. You got to set up for the conditions. Now I used a completely different setup at the team trials than I did at the nationals. Landing gear wise, motor wise, muffler wise. I had anticipated there'd be more emphasis on slow flying at the team trials, and I was wrong. So it basically turned out to be a corner contest in my opinion. So basically, we're going to put in all the goodies for the circle burner field this afternoon and go out and give that a try. One of the things I'm changing on this airplane right now is, if you can see in there, that push rod has some free play built into it. The ratios right now are set at 1 to 1 on this control hookup. And I'm going to put a different block in there that's going to set this to give it a little more flat movement than elevator. Now usually when you set a plane up with a little more flat movement than elevator, one of the things it does is track better in level flight. One of the things it does appreciably more is slow down in maneuvers, which is what I'm trying to make this do. It'll kill off some of the corner, which this plane seems to have too much corner anyway. And for the circle burner contest, I think that's what we're going to go with. That's one of the other modifications I'm doing today while I'm busy here. You can get in. I'll try to focus in and see what this horn looks like. I think we're going to be out of focus though. Unless we go to the macro lens on. I can't really fool with that right now. So those two little hatches come off. The block unbolts off the end of the horn. It's a horseshoe shaped deal. When it unbolts, of course, then the push rod lines up with where the normal horn, the center line, would be. And it's an easy way to basically adjust. Well, it turned out to be such a nice day today. I decided to go flying this morning. So I took the old Killer Bee off the wall. Went down to Two Guys for a few flights. And I figured I'd take some pictures of it, put it on this video for anybody who hasn't seen this guy out in the Nats or any other contest it's been flown in. The name of the plane is the Killer Bee. The BJ. Big Jim Greenaway design. That's where it got its nickname from, the Killer Bee. The killer bee, when I was painting this plane was built in a big rush. What happened is I was painting the Imran, and a bee flew right into the wet paint and stuck there, and when I tried to get him out and get him out of there, needless to say, he wasn't too happy about it. So I nicknamed him the killer bee. Yeah, I'm not going to take much footage of this. This is an old airplane. This is an 85 Concourse one. I went was new. It's been landed, inverted. It's had several repairs. The elevators have been replaced with monocoat to lighten it up. It's a 70+ ounce airplane. And I'll just walk around it and kind of get a high aspect plane, get a feel for what it really looks like. It's a real nice day. It's too nice of a day to be building a NOBLER. That's why I think I'm going to go flying again. Well, we're back from flying again. It's starting to get a little dark. I'll just take a couple more pictures of this before the day's over. I'm going to hang this up, kind of put this guy away for the winter, I think, right now. I'm just about finished with him. It's still oily. I should have wiped it off before I took these pictures. But anyway, season's just about over. I built 7 of these BJ, LJ type airplanes. They've all flown pretty good. They seem to carry a lot of weight well. Have big flaps. 1/3 of the wing is a flap. I think Jim Greenaway designed this particular one. It's got a V-deflecting nose. That's what those portholes are for. That's kind of a big Jim innovation. No cowling, just an incline where the cowling should be. Needless to say, a green canopy head. No wingtips. Real kind of an easy plane to build. Stab's a little higher than on normal Sunship. 3-to-2 control hookup. Arrow shaft push rods. 7-ounce baffle tank from Jim. Titanium landing gear from Gunder. Well, it looks like it's about We're going to try to build some elevators today. I've already cut out the outline as per the plan on 1/4 inch nice quarter grain wood. I have the edge of the wood, the grain running parallel to the trailing edge, not to the spar. I cut out a nice piece of 1/2 inch. We've already shown this on the video. So I'm going to get ready. I think I have a few ribs left over from before. Yeah, I got a few ribs. I'm going to start trimming in the ribs on one of these elevators. Okay, I guess the first thing we want to do is make sure we have the right shape. Yeah, looks like we're real close. Looks like we're real close on that. Take a little sanding block, even off the edges, and get a center line on everything. It's still early in the morning. It's about 5:30 in the morning. It's 5:45. My wife is getting ready to leave for work, so I'm getting ready to start the old day of building. It was such a nice day yesterday. I went flying. I think the thing on the video before here is some outdoor shots of the airplane. But today it looks kind of clammy out there. I don't think I'll be going flying today. Almost looking forward to building more than flying here. Really looking forward to getting this guy going. So what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is mark a center line on everything like we did yesterday. Hopefully we can maintain, with the center line, we can maintain everything being pretty true and level. Block sand in the airfoil the way we want. The elevator's trued up. Having a true elevator, well, having a light elevator, first of all, having a light set of flaps, elevators, things behind a CG, really contributes to having a good plane. When a plane gets heavy at the back end or the front end, one way or the other, and you have to compensate with solder and lead and nose weights, you run into all kind of crazy problems. You just never do get the plane to fly the way it should. The potential that's there in the plane never gets to the surface when a plane is tail heavy at the ends. The wing can be as heavy as almost necessary to keep it from folding, but when a plane has got a heavy stab and then you load it down with nose weight, it's always an accident waiting to happen. And I built a lot of them that way. And they never really do trim out to anything like their potential. Getting these center lines on, if you get a little practice, you can get them accurate enough by hand, and you can check it with a machinist ruler, or you can check it with 1/8 inch tape. If you're dealing with 1/4 inch wood, you can just run 1/8 inch tape around one side and trace the tape if you're not comfortable doing it this way. This is a real easy way to do it. Nothing hard about this. I mark the inside too so that when I'm grinding down the airfoil I can see about the same amount of wood on both sides of the center line, top and bottom. Just about everything you make should have a center line on it. Anything airfoil should. Makes it a lot easier for you, makes it a lot more accurate to build that way too. You get a ruler and get a center line on this guy. A lot of this you can do by eye pretty accurately. And since we're going to be sanding down into this center line, we're going to make an airfoil out of it. It really isn't too important that it be equal distance from the top and bottom. What is important is that it's straight and that it's true, that it's not radically off one way or the other. You can also use these center lines for your input part of the hinges. Now this piece of wood has a little bit of a warp in it, so you can see it when you put a center line on. That's why we're using this one for the elevators and not for the stab. You want the best part for the leading edge of the stab. And if it's a little crooked on the elevators, it'll only be half of the span. Like this piece is a little more than I'd like to see crooked. But we're going to be sanding an airfoil shape into this, so we'll just have to use the center line for our reference and disregard the rest of the part that's off. Alright, obviously the first step is going to be I want to match up those center lines. I want to match that up there and get started on having that piece on it. Okay. Take some old slow drying hot stuff. Don't know if we're going to have to kick this off. Now it looks like we got some reasonably good CA. It's even kicked. Well, we'll make sure. Don't want to waste too much video here waiting for this to kick off. Seems like the CA I get in hobby shops is always a year old by the time I get it. Never can get a fresh batch. Okay, and we'll do the same thing with the other side. We'll go over to the old Dremel saw and I've got to true this up a little bit. Maybe you want to true some of this up. Again, you want to get as little glue as possible on these glue joints and still have them be strong. You don't want to add a pound of glue to every glue joint, especially on the tail end of the plane. That's a regular no-no. Notice the center lines are lining up pretty nice. Now we're going to have to cut the middle of this out anyway, so it really doesn't matter. We'll build the elevators individually, so, and we'll constantly monitor that one's not getting a little bit bigger or stronger than the other, or lighter or heavier. I'd like them to be about the same weight too. Okay. Go over to the jigsaw now and saw that piece off. Like that. And we'll have two individual elevators here. Now we've got these elevators jigsawed out. Trying to get a nice edge on here if we can. NOBLER has nice rounded tips, so we want to keep that as one of the nice parts of the building. Extend the center line out into the curve. Don't lose any of that. Okay, you get the center line. And we'll use that center line to line up our horn when we make the horn. Again, we'll try to get this screwed up. The reason I don't glue the sandpaper to the sanding blocks is I like to constantly be moving the sandpaper on the block, so I'm not wearing out the corners. When you glue the sandpaper to the block, it comes out a little better, but you constantly wear out one part of the sandpaper. You don't really get your full use of the sandpaper that way. Money's no object, glue it up. If you're cheap like me, don't glue it. Okay, we've got a center line on everything. The next step is going to be, we want to get a little marking here where these ribs are going to go. And I want it to be, obviously, I want it to be match up to the elevator, so it looks like the same rib would contour right through the elevator instead. So I'll just mark each one, front and back, and that helps us put the ribs in. Getting the ribs in nice and straight is really a little more work than you might first suspect, but it's worth it. You spend the time doing this, and when you're done, you have something. You have something that other people can really appreciate. Alright, now I've got the line up of the ribs, line up for the back, center line on everything. I'm going to obviously have to put a little piece of wood in here, cross grain. Now see, the grain is going this way. I'm going to have the grain on top and bottom going this way. It looks like I'm going to have to put a little piece of 1/8 inch in there to even that out. But that's certainly going to make this real stiff like plywood. That's what I'm looking for. So I'll do this right now, get this squared away, come back, and I guess we'll pick this up at the point that the ribs are in there or installed already. The horn supports that I'm making, I'm going to glue that in there. Obviously it's cross grain, so this edge of the elevator will become like plywood, and I'll grind a notch for the horn in there, and I'll put some hot stuff on the wood to make it even stronger. I'll have one on the other side eventually, and then I'll go putting the ribs in. That's the next step. Rounded these edges off even with the Dremel tool. You can see the cross section here, center line on everything. Next step on this will be to put the ribs in, duplicate the part there. We'll put the ribs in just the same way I did it on the other part. Then we'll be ready to start putting the curve in. It's all nice and smooth. This contour is in. Left the trailing edge a little fat till after the ribs are in. I've got that taper in there. Here's one that isn't done. You can compare them. Before sanding and after sanding. The tip shape is rough on that. That one's nice and easy. I'll get that shape kind of even before I put the ribs in, just make it a little easier sanding without the ribs there. Again, I did that on a block, pushing it back and forth. get all the contours and shapes in there before you even start. I'm going to have to get more of a contour in here, but we'll let that go till a little bit later. I'll run off a couple of feet of footage putting these ribs in. Pretty much get this coffee out of the way. Time for a coffee break anyway. Pretty much just like we did the stab, except we've got a little bit more taper in the elevators, so we're going to have to really make sure these ribs are in solid, so when we go to sand and grind it down, we don't run into a problem. Now, in the event you make one a little bit too small, like I just did, sand it down into the next day, and you can use it right over. No need to throw any of them away. Good time to use up some of your scrap 1/16 quarter grain. I'd like to get everything on this tail quarter grain if we could, sea grain. Make it a little bit stiffer and nicer. I'm hoping this plane is going to last many years, so I want to have the construction really done right. The glue joints aren't going to start coming apart or the nose will fall off or something halfway through the season. Had a lot of luck in the past using this kind of construction on other planes. Seems really durable. Maybe a little bit labor intensive, but certainly very durable. I was out by John Davis's during the team trials, and he still has Solhavi's blue Nobler sitting out in the garage, and it don't look like one glue joint is broken on that plane. The silk span's getting a little ratty, but boy, it sure looks like it held up well. And that was kind of part of the reason I wanted to get into a Nobler project. Kind of bring back some of the flavor of years ago when life was a lot simpler, a lot less headaches and problems and inflation and everything. And, you know, maybe you're in that ball game too. Maybe you're getting on in years where you got to have some fun. You just can't spend your whole life being too pro-stunt. Got to have some fun doing this. Anyway, these little ribs, try to get them lined up 90 degrees. Get them nice and straight if you can. Best to make them a little bit oversized and glue them right in. Actually, this work goes pretty fast once you start doing it. Once you commit yourself into a project like this. There's something to be said for old wood aeroplanes. Aeroplanes that were all wood. They had a kind of a flavor all their own, in the same way biplanes have a flavor, and 55 Chevys, 57 Chevys, whatever age bracket you're in. They kind of never lose their special flavor. You can do what you want to replace them, and certainly they have been replaced. Maybe for good reason, maybe for not, but it sure is nice to have one, and I'm sure to bring back a lot of memories to a lot of people to actually build an old wood airplane with no pre-made parts, kind of do the whole thing yourself. One of the advantages you have of working like this is you have complete control of the project. You don't have to send out for anything to be made. You don't have to wait. You can just go get yourself some wood and start carving away. And it's relatively inexpensive to build an airplane. Once you have the kit parts traced out, I imagine you can build this whole airplane for under $50 in wood. The rest of it is just time. And, you know, to everybody, time is of a different value. I just talked to Win Paul last night. He's building a 60 ship, and I'm sure he's started already. So we exchanged some ideas over the phone. I talked to Frank McMillan last night. Frank's certainly going to be one of the people, I'm sure, that's going to be on more and more of these videos. He has Al Rabe for a friend, and Al's in this business. Hope we can get more people to contribute some of their little building techniques. Ken Budensink is going to put out a video magazine, hopefully every other month or so, if people will contribute the material. And I'll certainly be one of the people contributing. I hope we can get you to contribute some of this stuff too. And you know, hopefully we can use this as a system that complements the newsletter well. Help some of the people out that really don't have access to pro technology. And I guess there's no secret to being good at this. You just do it over and over and over and you get good automatically. But these kind of videos will help you avoid some of the pitfalls that are really really disastrous. When you build a whole plane and the nose falls off or the belt crank pulls out or tank leaks. Hopefully get you over some of the humps that really can ruin your whole winter, and I sure have had my share. Like, I don't know anybody that hasn't had his share. Almost everybody that's at the top level of this hobby paid the price one way or the other. They either paid by building over and over and over and over, or by being good listeners, putting their ego in check at the door and listening. Everybody in the local area, the Circle Burners, has a stunt forum every year, which we're going to try to videotape this year, by the way, and make it available. And every year somebody different will do it. One year Lou and Glenn did it. One year Richie Tower and Bobby Hunt did it. I've done it a few times. And it's kind of like a show and tell of all your latest ideas and technology and what's new and what isn't, and what worked and what didn't. I can usually have a good time doing it because I always have plenty of stuff that didn't work the year before. Can fill up a whole video magazine with that. But every once in a while we hit something that works real good and try to pass it on to the rest of the people. And if you don't do that, we're going to wind up with a hobby with 10 people in it a couple of years from now. And maybe not even 10, maybe even they'll get sick of it. But if we keep some open communication, I think it'll go on for a long time. I don't think this hobby's ever going to really die. As much has been said about the hobby dying, I don't think it's going to die. It may get smaller and smaller, but if everybody pitches in a little bit and contributes, certainly is not going to die prematurely. And from this year's Nationals, from seeing how many people were interested in the advanced class, I think we got a bright future. I think we got every reason in the world to be happy. Time for some coffee here. Okay, but that's one tail section. The ribs are in. I'm going to go over to the bench now, see if I can put the camera over there and kind of sand the airfoil shape into this. And let me focus the camera over there. And again, just like I did the stab, I'm going to try to sand in the airfoil shape. Try not to get too carried away. I see we broke one rib already. A lot of the free flight people use this technique to get their ribs all equal. If you make an I-beamer, this is a real good technique. Of course, you can't use the table. You make a nice bar, hardwood bar, a piece of aluminum with some sandpaper glued to it. And you can kind of do the same thing. It evens out all the ribs. Makes it really nice looking. An all-wood aeroplane is a real attractive thing, especially if you enjoy seeing the ribs and seeing the handiwork that goes into it. Certainly a good way to express yourself if you have any kind of an artist's inclination. These planes certainly never look mass-produced. They always look handmade. They always look like there's a lot of work in them. And I can think back to some of the ones I really thought were special. And boy, they are a lot of them. This year at the Nationals, we got to see Bob Gildini's Stingray, 20-year-old airplane, and well, it was something special. Seeing all those airplanes over John Davis's house was a real emotional up too. I'm going to try to get John to do a videotape of what he's got in his garage. He's got about 20 airplanes there, ballerinas, sharks, Noblers, Thunderbirds, some kind of homemade thing with retracts, a Bearcat. Got a lot of neat stuff. He's somebody I hope we could really get to contribute some video. I think he can make a whole video right in his garage. Super nice guy. I met him for the first time at the team trials. We started exchanging letters and phone calls. And that's part of what I hope this whole operation is going to turn into, this whole video thing. We're going to be able to get some people to open up, show us their house, show us what their other hobbies are, give us a look at their family having breakfast. So this something really is like a family, there's no doubt about it. If we're not a family, I don't know what is. Okay, that's about as close as we're going to get it without the sanding block. The rest of this I'm going to do with a sanding block, and I'm going to do it by hand. First I'm going to put the hinges in and then block sand this right down with a block. And true everything off that way with a block. It's real important that when this is done, the elevators, you can see from this picture, the elevators are bigger than the stab. Stab is bigger than the elevator. It's got to be true, and it's got to be real accurate. At this point in time, this should be so accurate you can't see the hinge line. So I'll do the rest of this one, no sense putting all this video on. And we'll come back to this when we're ready to block sand this in. Okay, we're kind of ready to set this up for the hinges. Now, this is all sanded out, almost ready for the final sanding. I've got a center line on there. I've got the little hinges. I'm not going to use big circus hinges on this plane. It's not a big heavy duty enough plane to warrant those kind of hinges. Try to keep the weight down. I'll use these kind of hinges. What I'm going to do with those hinges too is clip the ends off them. Try to get rid of some of the unnecessary weight at the back end of the plane. I just pulled a pin out of one hinge here. But on a big 60 ship, it's not really important to keep the weight super down. This one I want to keep super down. I don't want to have a thing on this that don't weigh enough. So I'm going to kind of trim all these hinges down. I'm going to need 6, 3 on each side. It'll be fun picking these up off the shop floor later. Really have to make an effort on a NOBLER. Everything behind the center of gravity is quite a bit of mass of airplane. Got to kind of be careful not to get too much of anything back there. Glue, wood, epoxylite, fillets, hinges, anything. The minimum behind the CG. The nose will make real heavy duty. We won't worry about it. But I'm really making an effort at this. He and I have such a reputation for making these big heavy airplanes. Let's see if I can make one decent this time out. Alright, this is only for the tail. The flap hinges I don't think I'll bother doing this to, but I want to keep that tail light. 6 hinges. I'm going to try to plot out where they should go. So, one of the things I want to do, I'm going to line this up. I want to pretty much show how to get that cut for the hinges in there real accurate. What I've got is 1/4 inch tape. Of course, I've got the taper sanded into it that way, so I can just lay this out here. Hopefully, I can mark it that, and it'll be a curve too. It won't be a straight line, that's for sure. It's got too much dust on it to stick. Needless to say, this tape I have is about 1,000 years old. I don't even think there's any glue on this tape. What awful tape this is. There we go. Now we're in better shape. First couple feet of it are covered with sawdust and stuff. Alright, again, it's just 1/4 inch tape, and what I'm going to do is try to measure out about, don't forget there's a taper in this, so it can't be a straight line. It has to be a taper. What I try to do is get the taper in there equally if I possibly can. And now what I'll do with a nice big 26 blade, starting at the end and seeing, I'll work right up to the tape and use the center line in the tape for that angle. Try to get it off in as few pieces as possible. This is usually the part where you slip and cut the tip of your finger off or something. Especially on video. We've yet to see blood on video. There aren't many planes that I've built that I haven't at least one nice jab in a finger and a leg or something dropping exacto on my foot. That's just part of building, I guess. Once I get that in. Now the object of that tape on there, that keeps you from sanding too far. That gives you a nice, and it keeps, you don't want that back piece. It's 1/2 inch now. We don't want it to be less than 1/4 inch when we're done. So we can actually sand right up to the tape. Right up to the, try to get a nice point on the front. It'll make putting the hinge pockets in here a little easier. Again, sand right up. You can actually feel the tape. And you can look at that center line, and you'll get a real neat job if you practice this technique a little bit. That should give you a real neat job. Shouldn't have any trouble duplicating that. Now on planes that I build, I usually leave the flaps and elevators off until after they're buffed out, but on this plane I want to build it with traditional techniques. So I'm going to be installing the hinges permanently early on in the building. Okay, that feels good. Obviously now we just duplicate that on the back. Okay, one of the things that's real neat about making a tail is always getting the hinge slots in. Now, if anybody can see, I've made up a little tool. It's a piece of 16th plywood, another piece of 16th plywood with a 32nd balsa behind it, and some 180 grit sandpaper sanded, glued onto it. Now the object is you get the height according to which hinge you're going to use by running your finger that way. You obviously want a little clearance so that the dope build up. So that's about the height we want. And the width, we want to cut slots in the hinges that are a little bit wider than the hinges so they're not binding. So what we'll try to do now is equally space out 3 of these. And we'll get one right about in the middle. Let's see if we can get one right about here. Now I'll just run this up and down. Now when that piece of 16 plywood bottoms out, and it'll bottom out on the leading edge. Here it comes now. It's going to bottom out. That's as far as you want that to go. This is a trick that Dick Maddox sent into Pro Stunt News. This has all been documented. I think the first or second Stunt News had this in it. But that's a nice little slot. Now we want to get one right about here, I guess. Let's see. You don't want to be too close to the horn. I put the horn right on the edge of the elevators. That keeps the horn as short as possible, minimum amount of twist and torque, and keeps the horn as light as possible. That music wire is probably the heaviest part of the tail. Okay, I've got 2 slots. Obviously I'd like to have one out at the end, but I don't want to have it where it's ultra super thin, so I'll try to get this at a reasonable spot. Again, once that bottoms out, you've got the perfect slot for that hinge. You don't want to go any further than that. Okay, we've got 3 slots in a matter of 30 seconds. Now what we'll do is marry up the 2. Get out the old reliable pen and mark so that they're both equal, so that we have a nice mirror image when we look at this. One hinge isn't further out than the other. Now a lot of people don't realize sealing the flap hinge lines, what a tremendous trim change that makes to the plane. Putting more hinges in will seal a flap hinge line too. And in this case, we'd rather do it with tape, but on a 60 ship I've put in as many as 10 hinges in one side of the flaps, and it kind of semi-sealed the hinge line without the tape, which was real neat. Worked to be a good trick. It adds some weight though if you don't cut and trim the hinges down. I try to cut and lighten all the hinges. Now you can probably gauge this in probably a matter of a minute. I've got all the hinge slots in. They're all perfect too. Once that plywood bottoms out, you've got your exact, absolute spot. A lot of people put 2 hinges in the end of the elevator and flaps. I don't bother doing that. I don't think that's necessary. Okay, we've got all the slots in. Again, we'll put our center line back on here as best we can. That's for sure. We want to keep that center line on there. Sure don't want to lose that center line. Because after we install the hinges and the horn, then we're going to take this whole assembly and block sand the airfoil back on that table. Get that airfoil so there's no high spots, no low spots. As accurate as possible. Check to see if we built in any twists. If we did, we can at that point in time go back and untwist it, hopefully. If you get used to doing this with your finger, you'll find you can get it pretty accurate without going to too many lengths. Okay, we've got our center line back on here. So the next step will be we'll have to cut that out for the hinges. Now I don't have a lot of luck cutting stuff out for hinges, so that hinge slotting tool, I never can make it work real good. I'm going to try to do these thin hinges with a razor blade and see if I can have any luck. Let's find out. Haven't used these small hinges in quite a while. Let's just get an idea if this is going to work or not. Yeah, I think that'll work just fine. So I'll do this. When you're using the big circus hinges, you really have to use some kind of an alternative to this. Put some slots in there. Two hinges. Alright, this looks like it's going pretty business-like here. These are real small hinges. When you're using the big IM hinges, it seems like it's a lot more work. These are fitting in real nice. I may use these little guys on my next big ship even. These work real nice. Okay, that looks like that's just fine. Kind of line them up. Here's where you usually glue the pin at a hinge. It would have been a good idea to put a little drop of oil on those pins. They do make some stuff so that hot stuff can't go on there too, by the way. I don't have any of it. I usually take a little bit of motorcycle chain oil and put it on there. That's a good alternative. They look like they're going in pretty decent. Put a drop on the wire. These particular hinges have a little wire. I don't want to unseal that area. Keep that area sealed up. You can always go around the edges of these pockets too. These ends of the pockets seem to take a beating when you're sanding a plane down. This will kind of keep them nice and neat. Also, what I like to do now, I've purposely gone through with the razor blade into the back of this so that I can send some of that hot stuff down there. If nothing else, this will seal it up too. This will get it sealed. Alright, that's a little, they got a little bit of hot stuff in it. It's sticky, but not too much. Okay, and we'll basically do that to the other side and then install it right in. Done making up a little control horn here. Obviously I want it to be as short as possible. Copied that dimension off the plan, silver soldered the whole thing up. Let's hope this looks like a good little guy. I'll clean this up with alcohol. This is the way I hold the horn, just shove it in the back of the wood while I'm... Make sure it's 90 degrees this way. Clean it all up with alcohol, sand it down a little bit, make sure it's nice and polished and clean so there's no corrosion a year from now. You notice I have an 1/8 inch hole and a 3/32 rod. That's to give the elevators a little bit of free play, something that almost every plane needs. If you've never tried that, that's really